Hey everybody, welcome back to the Quest for the Bestest. It's the podcast where us, the Backlog Boys, Timo, that's me, Tucker, Tanner, and Abram talk about the very best picture winners, or at least we try to. We're looking through all the best picture winners, trying to find the best ones in random order, of course. That's the whole shtick of the Quest for the Bestest. And this week, we are talking about the 2018 Best Picture winner. It was directed by Peter Farrelly. That was Green Book. A bit of a controversial movie. We'll see what happens as we talk about it. But before we do, I want to talk about what happened last week, because we were talking about The English Patient, that 1996 Best Picture winner, Anthony Minghella. We were not super hot on it. We thought it had a lot of issues, and there were some minor elements that we liked. On the whole, not super high. It got a 5.0 score and ended up at 47th place on our list out of 55 films. So pretty much down there. Hard to argue otherwise that it's in the bottom of the list. And I think we're rocking and rolling. I want to hear a featured comment, and then I want to talk about Green Book. Abram, I believe that's your duty.
Yes, it is. And Timo, both of our children actually left comments, and I don't want to pick favorites. And because they're both short, I'm going to read them both out.
Okay.
First from the honorary fifth member of Backlog Banter and our oldest son, John Tour 11, who says, "The girl I was dating in my teens was begging that we were to go see this movie. I refused, and we ended up seeing Fargo instead. What an excellent decision that turned out to be, ... Yes, totally Team Timo here. This was just boring. 3.5 out of 10.
This was Team Timo there, but yes. I think we were all on that page. I think we were all Team Timo last week.
And then our adopted son, Dan's, also left a little pithy comment for us, too. Mm-hmm. I do not remember the desert being a character in this movie as opposed to Lawrence or Dune. Haven't seen the new one yet. I hated, all caps, hated The English Patient. I did not connect with any of the characters and remember them mostly as being unlikable. I also didn't care about the story, but I did see excellent production values and acting and did appreciate those."
Okay, well, excellent comment.
So it sounds like everyone's on the same page as us, actually.
Yes.
It's kind of good to have a nice unanimity.
Unanimity.
Yeah.
Well, if you think that we're totally, completely wrong about English Patient, let us know in a all caps filled comment. We want to hear it. We love hearing your comments.
We do.
Drop them down below. If you
English
want to talk about
Patient
Green
lovers,
Book,
please leave comments on that episode. I know they exist, because when I was looking up the very few English Patient reviews that exist on YouTube, it was all just comments, like dozens and dozens of comments, be like, "English Patient's the greatest thing ever," and the guy's like, "No." So that's what I want us to become.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
give us views, English Patient lovers.
English Patient lovers, we want you. Now, time to find out. Are we Green Book lovers or not? Who wants to start us off? Maybe a little plot synopsis, maybe not. This movie's pretty recent. You might, dear viewer, you might have seen this when it came out in theaters. You might have remembered it winning Best Picture. And everything, the discourse, to use a Twitter word, that surrounded it as when it came out and then when it won. Any one of you guys wanna jump off the bat and begin?
Sure. I'll do the plot synopsis.
Okay, you'll take the one that doesn't require you to say your opinion yet. Okay.
Exactly, precisely. Viggo Mortensen plays Tony Lip, everyone's favorite lovable racist. Tony Lip he's a bouncer at the Copacabana in New York City, and then through some unfortunate circumstances that gets shuts down. He's out of work, so he picks up on a tip that there's a certain doctor in need of driving around the country. Come to find out, this doctor is Dr. Donald Shirley, a black man, a black pianist, and he's a little apprehensive about this, but he takes the job, and the movie is essentially a road trip movie where they're going through not only the North but the Deep South, the Jim Crow South of 1962, I believe this movie is set. And as you may expect, they run into several racially charged altercations. They form a friendship over the course of this film, which ultimately culminates in Tony Lip and Donald Shirley arriving back in New York on Christmas Eve, and they close out the film with a nice little dinner.
It's a Christmas movie.
Dinner. It's a Christmas movie.
In certain ways.
It's more of a Christmas movie than Die Hard. I
don't say it.
No.
Tucker,
I know what all of our comments are going to be about next week.
I'm predicting a lot a lot of animus in this review already, so don't bring up any more controversial topics than you already need to.
Okay.
Okay.
How about I share my opinion?
Okay.
Go, Abram.
Because
I do want to throw in something, because I think this is important.
Yeah.
Tucker and I, if you didn't catch the end of last episode, Tucker and I saw this movie together in theaters when it came out.
Yes.
And we shall see what our opinions are now, because my opinion is different. And you guys know what that means. But is Tucker's opinion different? I don't know. So, Abram, you haven't seen it before, right? This is your first time watching it. Okay. And what did you think?
This is gonna be a complicated review, I think.
I agree.
I really, really like Green Book. I like the movie a lot. I think it is on a plot and characters level very engaging. And I think it's well made. The problem comes when you talk about the political facet and dimension of this film. Because here's the thing about it. I do not think this is a white savior movie. I think what I liked about this film is that I viewed it as a very complicated portrayal of systemic racism in America. And I want to talk about that. I already see Tanner fucking flipping his eyes back. But I'm telling you right now that in my
His eyes are
opinion...
rolling back in his head. He's shaking on the floor, foaming at the mouth.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I do not think this is a white savior film.
Okay.
But I do not think that its portrayal of systemic racism in America is particularly apt because it also exists in this sort of, I believe the term is used as post-racial viewpoint of America, which feels peculiar. It really is this sort of oddly situated film on a thematic and political level where its messaging about race and class basically swings across the entire political and theoretical gamut in a way that feels contradictory. That said, I think that the film on top of that is very engaging. And I do not personally feel like it crumbles under the weight of its messaging.
Okay.
Okay.
That was
Tanner?
a phenomenal thesis statement. We
Yeah.
we usually, we got our opinions on it, but you actually had like a concept there. I need a thesis statement for a paper I'm working on, so.
Tanner, you seem like you are chomping at the bit now.
I'm rolling up my sleeves for this video.
Okay.
So am I.
I don't think Abram is too far off base. I think you're slightly off base, Abram. I don't think you're too far off base because there is a way to look at Green Book that you can look upon this film favorably, and I find myself stuck between these two viewpoints. One in which you can compliment, the likable writing, the pace of it all, the characters, all that good stuff. But I think there is another facet of it where if you look at all those things another way, particularly like the writing and the characters, obviously, this film is pretty politically reprehensible in how it portrays, as Abram said, this sort of idea of a post-racialized Jim Crow South. All the writers on this film were white men. I believe Tony Lip's son is one of the writers on this film and a producer. Yeah. And I think that comes across in the film's politics. We can get into specifics about all of this down the road, but I think this film at its heart is a movie about race and how, race plays into these two guys' friendship. And I don't think you can escape talking about the implications of the racial politics of this film, which, again, we will get into soon enough.
We have to talk about them.
We don't have to talk about it, but ultimately, yeah, I do think I think there's some good things to be found in here as well, if you want to look at it that way. But I'm gonna pass it off. I feel like I'm putting my foot in my mouth here.
Okay, Tucker, you want to go next? Because I feel like we'll flip flop here. Tucker, I want to.
Sure. No. Yeah. So I'm pretty close to Abram's opinion. My opinion of this film going in, and from our first viewing in which Timo and I both came out of that film, and this is one of the few times I remember the post-movie discussion actively. I remember sitting in the back seat of my dad's car next to you and talking like 3 rows of seats forward to my dad and my brother, and we're like, actually, this is a really good movie. And I remember you saying, oh, it's on a 3-act structure. Like, there's all these points we were bringing up. And I remember since then just being like, yeah, that's a really good movie, and I have nothing to complain about with it. And through this rewatch, my opinion has faltered slightly. I think that the movie works a lot stronger on that first watch when you're not exactly sure which scenarios are coming up and what direction the characters' relationships are going to go in necessarily. But I still do think that when you break down a lot of the elements of this film, it hits good marks across the board, I believe. I think it's personal interpretation of the politics of the film and what you believe the writer's intent was versus it being released in a vacuum or not, compared to it winning the Best Picture award. I think this is a fascinating film because it's not the best movie of 2018. It's ridiculous this movie won the Best Picture award, but it's not a bad film at all. I think this is a very good film, if not great film, across the board. But it's actually diminished by the fact that it won the highest award that a film can receive. I think it's a fascinating film, but because of that, and I love talking about it, also because I like this movie.
All right. Before we continue, before Timo gives his thoughts, I have to acknowledge for the audience that, yes, I see what Tucker did to his sleeves. It happened. We let it go for too long without recognition.
Yes.
They're rolled up too far. That shouldn't have happened. He's going to leave it. You're just going to have to deal with it.
I apologize.
We're very sorry.
But
Yeah.
you got to commit to the bit.
I guess so.
Sure.
That's
I
what you
guess
do
I'm
here
still
at
up.
Backlog Banter.
Okay, well,
Timo?
I'm going to keep my sleeves down for this
Okay.
portion, and we shall see what happens later on. Keep watch. But my opinion of Green Book, since watching it the first time, this is only the second time I've seen it, has decreased quite a lot. I found the second time I watched it to be significantly less engaging, mostly on a rewatch value front. I just didn't get anything else out of the film after I watched it the first time. As you know, I have gained a lot more understanding of racial and class attitudes in the country and what it means, and so I find that this film is kind of problematic as an understatement. I find that this film is extremely neoliberal, if you will take that word as a way. And if you want, later on, I can expound upon what I mean in that. Basically, the film advocates for change by saying that stuff should happen without ever really showing how it should happen. And I find that there's just the bringing up of stereotypes over and over again, kind of a la Crash, but not handled anywhere nearly as poorly. Still not great, but just not only of Black Americans, but also Viggo Mortensen's character as an Italian is very, very heavily stereotyped, and that it somewhat tries to defeat these stereotypes of Black Americans. I don't think it succeeds completely, but it really doesn't try to confront its own stereotypes about Italians, often kind of playing them for laughs. And so if you want to be in a real progressive sense of the whole thing, well, you should probably treat all of those things equally, at least in my view. And I also found that I really suffered the dialogue. I did not find this film very funny on the second time. I just found it hokey and I, forced laughs most of the time. I'm like,
Sure.
oh yeah, that's a joke. Okay, I will mildly chuckle, but I don't know if I found very many of the moments truly funny, even though I could tell that it was trying to go for. So while I think that the film is well made, on all the filmmaking fundamentals, it's just a solid film on the base. I think the superstructure of the whole film is just not there, and beyond not good, into the damaging territory. But I compared it to Crash earlier, and I don't think that's a good way to talk about it. It's nowhere near as bad as that is in terms of
that. I think.
Yeah. In
That
terms
I think
of
we can all agree on. I think we can all agree on that.
That's the true thesis statement of today. Is
Not
Green
as
Book
bad as Crash.
Not as bad as Crash.
No.
Let's just talk about the racial element of the film, because
Okay.
I think it's just front loaded. I think it is frankly the most important and interesting part of Green Book to talk about, because I think that beyond it seems like Timo, we might have a bit of a disagreement about sort of the plot level points, but I think where we're going to have the meat of the disagreement is probably going to be here.
God, what better than listening to the four white guys talk about the racial politics of Green Book?
Oh yeah.
Since I said that, you can't get angry about it. I hung a lantern on it.
the least
I'm just
we
joking.
can do
Whatever.
is be a little self-conscious.
Yeah.
I know who I am. What do you guys get into the
I'd
meat
like
of it?
to start off.
Tanner, tell me the steak and gravy of your thoughts.
I think the worst aspect of this film's, political philosophy is this claim that is never revoked by my count, that Tony is quote unquote blacker than Donald. It gets brought up, it's hinted at multiple times with the fried chicken, with the Little Richard, with all those things, but it gets brought up directly around the third act, around the beginning of that third act.
And they use the exact language to talk about it.
Yes.
They say, he
Yes,
says,
they
I'm
say-
blacker than you.
Exactly. And they get out of the car and they have this heated conversation in the rain about how Donald, feels alienated from his race because he was brought up in a more high society context of life, which I feel like is very off base. That somehow that makes him less black and Tony is more black when Donald is absorbing the brunt of the attacks from the racist people in the Deep South, quite obviously. It is unfathomable to me that they put that in there and then didn't reconcile it, because Donald is very clearly, he's upset about this. And this gets to a larger point about why the movie doesn't have Donald Shirley as its main character. That's a whole tertiary point, but I think it plays into this in the fact that this claim of that blackness is tied to these certain things, and that Donald is somehow divorced from it because he has been brought up in this high society context is just way off base, and I think is the worst aspect of the racial politics of this film.
I think the thing about it is that what they're clearly doing on the most surface level about their commentary about race, before you even dive further into it, is that they are obviously inverting the traditional racial hierarchy that you'd expect out of the film like this.
Yeah.
It is the well-educated black man and the uneducated white man in the context of the Deep South. And I think what they were trying to accomplish was sort of like an exposure of the flaws with characterizing these people solely based on their race. The admittance of somebody into the dining hall at the end of the film in Birmingham on the basis of their skin color, when Lip has no clue about anything going on around him, and it's Shirley who's the educated one. I think that's what they're trying to do, but it doesn't really work. I agree with you, Tanner, because I think it comes off, especially with the fried chicken scene in the car, which I think is just so poorly written. It just comes off as not productive and leaning into stereotype the way that Crash did, I think, but not in a way that beyond the surface level, yes, it is the white guy performing the stereotype. Beyond that level of commentary, there really is nothing there, and in that sense, I think it feels harmful.
Yeah.
But I think the thing about this film that I find interesting, and the reason that I think this is a great film for the provocation of discussion, is because it sort of embodies this really contradictory view of race in America, which I think is very reflective of real life conversations around race in America. On a personal political level, I don't necessarily feel like I have a place to comment on this, nor do I really have a dog in the fight in terms of which ideology is the right ideology, really. But I think what this film does, and what I appreciated, was the ways that I felt like it did address structural systemic racism through what might be ham-fisted, but I think effectively told narratives about this complete, frankly, idiot in Lip who has this privilege that Shirley doesn't. But I just don't think that it takes that commentary far enough, and then it undercuts that commentary with the very end of the film, which ends up being this sort of post-racial kumbaya about everybody celebrating that just does not feel earned or carried out. It doesn't feel like either of its very much conflicting ideologies are given play, and it doesn't even really feel like it's combining them in a way that understands the tensions intrinsic to having both these philosophies in the same film.
See, now, here's where I disagree with you again here, Abram. You said this film tackles systemic racism in a at least positive way. And I very much disagree with that, because the chances that it has to actually address systemic racism, not interpersonal racism, which would be the relationship between Tony and Donald, or even the people in the bar or the people in the dining hall or what have you. Actual systemic racism would be coming from the systems in place of American society and American government. And the only time that even sort of comes up is with police interactions. And while they hang a hat on the fact that, yes, the cops are racist, they don't do that well. Because it really comes down to two interactions for me. The first one is that night in the rain before they actually get put in jail. The cop walks up and, first of all, seems to have more of a problem with Tony than anything, and also is very nice about how he says, like, hey, this is a sundown town, guys. What are you doing here? He's not abusive in any way. He's like, you guys better get out of here. And the only reason that turns violent is because he makes a derogatory statement towards Tony and not towards Donald. The second interaction is the final one when they're driving back on the way to Christmas Eve, when they find the good, non-racist northern cop. You thought that he was going to be racist, but tut, tut, tut. Not all cops are racist. It really rejects any sort of criticism of systemic racism. It's so easy to do because it's 1960s America. It is perhaps the most racially charged era in modern American history. And they just fumble the ball on every attempt.
I think that the scene with the police is where the film is near its most egregious, especially when we get to that end. That the scene, I don't really know why it has to be there. Besides, like, throw it. It feels like they brought someone from the police union into the writer's room and said, write a scene where the cops don't look like total assholes. Which, if you look at 1960s civil rights history, the cops were total assholes in the South and in the North too. And so it's like, it's disingenuous, and I feel like that scene in particular borders on like a historical like mistruth. It doesn't represent history very well in order to tell the story when the story is about history. And so it's like that scene leaves a really, really bad taste in my mouth after it got done.
It definitely does. Sorry, do you want to say something, Tucker? I didn't mean to cut you off.
I would love to. I'm just hearing all this stuff that you guys are talking about and thinking of this film from, frankly, obviously a different perspective from when I went in looking at this film. I mostly watched this film through the eyes of myself, but the viewpoint that this film is not intending to do any sort of major large-scale criticism, and because of that, I don't necessarily think it fails at it. It just never necessarily tries. Scenes like the wholehearted good cop at the end are fucking weird, and it feels really out of place and like really ham-fisted, but I do think that those scenes are the minority in terms of talking about how race and stereotypes impact interpersonal connection, which is what I think the theme that this film is really trying to tackle does surprisingly well. I think that the whole thing that Tanner started with of Tony saying that he's blacker than Don Shirley and the way that plays into both of their personalities is actually really well done. You know Tony Lip is insensitive, uneducated, doesn't realize what he's saying is going to be construed in the way that would really hurt Don's feelings. He thinks that this is just a topic that people bring up, and the way that Don reacts to it gives him this sort of extra dimension of he is a person that is out of his league in almost every scenario. He is placed in such a position that alienates him from both groups that he might connect to, and that makes him a really compelling character. And also, Tony's insensitivity is equally compelling, and I think the way that they sort of support each other's weaknesses makes that interaction, even if you might read it as ham-fisted, actually surprisingly nuanced and interesting for their relationship and the way that they are approaching discussing race with each other. I don't necessarily think the film wants that to be read as this is the themes of America, this is the themes of the interaction between these two people. And I think that's why I don't have an issue with a lot of those scenes is I read it through the eyes of these characters who I think are incredibly well written, incredibly well acted, and have a fascinating relationship. And
Okay.
all these scenes feed into that.
I want to think
what
about
the film is trying to do.
Tucker, I want to think about the title in this instance because the title of the film, Green Book, is referring to an element of systemic racism in America, in which the black travelers are unable to stay where white tourists want to go, and so even though the film narratively is about these two people and how they interact, I think thematically it's almost impossible to divorce the impersonal from the systemic, just in the way that like racism works, or at least in the way that I view how racism plays out. It not only affects the interpersonal, but at the same time and in equal force affects the whole system.
But okay, go for it, Abe. I'm sorry.
Well, I think I'm with Tucker in part for sure, because I do find the relationship between the two characters to be compelling, even if it is a pretty surface level inversion of racial stereotypes. I think that the ways they grow and have really, I think, human moments together, like the writing of the letters and things, is great from a plot level, a character level. But I just don't think that if you're telling the story about 1960s civil rights era America, that you can not address the systemic component to racism in our country. And I think that for me, where I think the criticisms pointing systemically felt useful was in this sort of classless union that these two guys sort of bridge to, I think, push back against these structures perhaps a little bit more than you might be viewing through your perspective, Tanner, because I think that I think perhaps the most telling scene for me is when Lip is able to bribe the police officers to let Shirley go after he was caught having, the implication is he was having sex with that guy in the shower. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that the fact that Lip, beyond his prejudices, came to Shirley's aid there says something explicitly, but I also think implicitly the fact that Lip was able to bribe these men talks about his privilege in this system and the fact that he was able to get Mahershala Ali out of there, I think is very damning as a commentary about race and politics within the criminal justice system, race and politics within the larger American culture. And so for me, I did view it in instances like this as being an effective target against racism within institutions, within police, within society. The fact that Lip was able to do what he does, I think, is damning. And I think that's part of why I personally can't view this as a white savior narrative, because I think that it does, whether implicitly or explicitly, target structures on a larger level, which is typically not the political ideology associated with the politics that tell a white savior narrative.
Okay. I would err on the side of disagreement there again, but for the sake of moving this towards more a holistic movie review, I'm going to talk about the interpersonal racism and the issues I have with that on the road to talking about these characters a little bit, because I want to talk about their character flaws. Tony's very obvious character flaw is the fact that he is racist. He's very uninformed on these issues. He operates on stereotypes and gut reactions to black people and people of all races in the country, but he's also magically not homophobic for some reason. But because you brought up the him bribing the cops thing, but so that's Tony's character flaw. Don's character flaw is that he's stuck up. He's too uptight about everything. He's alienated. And the film seems to be equivocating these two things. Is that, well, yes, Tony needs to become less racist, but Don also needs to chill out and, maybe if we can operate off what Tony says, quote unquote, become more black. And I feel like that comes to fruition when he plays in the Orange Crow, I think is what the bar is called, the Orange Bird. I feel like that's where his sort of character flaw gets resolved, is that, he sort of welcomes this community again, which another issue I have with this film before you guys can comment on that.
Okay, yes, you said before.
One quick thing. Don never interacts, at least from my recall, with another black person for a majority of this film. Do you guys remember any scene where he directly interacts with another black person?
It's only tacit. The one that they linger on is the black people who are in the field. That is the only time, but as not a spoken interaction.
Of course not.
It's framed to be an introspective scene where he is thinking things. There is a conversation being had there on a subtextual level, but no, he does not actually talk until the bird.
That claim that, that Donald Shirley is apparently less black than, the average black person in America seems very gross to me about a person in this movie. It's a biographical look at Donald Shirley, who, again, the family was very displeased with how he was portrayed in this film, as well as the fact that, the idea that if you want to tackle his alienation from black people in America, you don't have him interact with anybody. Donald Shirley, actually marched for civil rights. He was at the March for Selma. So this sort of idea that he's alienated from all of this and sort of, views himself as above all of this is really gross to me.
That makes me think the idea that he's above all of this, because while Tanner, you talked about his character flaw being him being stuck up, I view it more as that he is actually just classist and that he just doesn't really like poor people at all, which gets into it, again, it's a strange equivocation. I don't think you really ever, equivocate, you hate, poor people, or you hate people of a different skin color than yourself. Those are things that should just stay separate. They, there's intersectionality in how that plays out, but in making them equal is strange. But when let me see. I think I might have lost my train of thought. But when we're talking about how Don Shirley, if the real Don Shirley marches in Selma, and he's a civil rights proponent, which is so he's an anti-racist. In this film, he accepts the racism and doesn't fight against it ever. And that's a character point where the two of them, he only ever fights against it in the climax. And I find that also to be disingenuous, where he has given up, and even though the character thing at his character resolution at the end is that he fights back against it. The idea that a character who has experienced racism all their life and that the thing that they do is give up is disheartening to me. And that's kind of where I read into the neoliberal analysis of this film, is that the thing to do against great odds and against horrible injustice is to give up until you are shown how to not give up by Tony Lip, which is in my reading of the film is what happens through Don Shirley's character arc, is that he says, I give up. I don't want to try to confront these people. It's whatever, and I will just suck it up and deal with this horrible, horrible racism, until Tony's like, wait, why are you dealing with this? This is horrible. And then he's like, I won't deal with it. And I will fight up for it. Why does Tony Lip have to inspire him to do that? That's my question.
I think because you said something when you began speaking that I really agree with, which might betray the more far left parts of my personal political ideology, in that class is what is the biggest issue. And I think that this film is muddy in its messaging, so this might be me reading a little bit too much into it, but I think that it has a lot to do with class and a sort of, not class uprising, but a sort of joining of class together, because
There's
think
a
that
term
a lot
for
of
that,
the
Abram. It's called class consciousness.
Solidarity, yeah.
I think that because a lot of the best character moments and the ones that feel the most earned are when they relate to class. I think, personally, to go back to what Tanner said a little bit ago, I don't think that Lip's character flaw is that he's racist. I think his flaw is that he is uneducated, and that they are using
Well, what's the difference, really?
Well, I think what they're
I think he's
commenting on.
both.
Well,
I do think there's a line to be drawn there that does connect them. Is he's not doing extremely ridiculously racist things. His racist moments are very implicit bias or like bias he doesn't realize he has, and he overcomes that by getting to know someone of a different race on a deeper level. I don't think that's an unreasonable character thing to fix that flaw. Is he doesn't. I don't think he knows he's being really racist in the moments that he is because he's uneducated. He doesn't realize the moments of himself doing those things until someone is able to point that out to him, and he's able to overcome that through conversation, through relation, through actual development.
Well, that's
Here's
what
what I will say
was.
very quickly. That gets into the whole the joke about this movie is that it solves racism. Is the idea that, well, all you need to do to not be racist is just like talk to a black person and that'll solve it.
See, but I think that readings like that are a little bit too reductive. And the reason I feel that is because it is told pretty explicitly through the film that a lot of Tony's prejudices come from his personal experience. When he's talking shit about the other members of Shirley's trio, it's relating back to his wartime experiences. When he's writing the letters, it is very clear that he got very little education. And I think that the function of the swapped racial stereotypes in part is to place the emphasis on a need for higher education. Because through Tony's education, I think he does come to realize his actions as racist, because for a lot of the movie he does not view them as such. A lot of his statements come from a place of, in the context of the film when it comes to the music or the war related stuff, from a place of uneducation. And I think what this film is trying to advocate for, whether or not it manages to do that, is, and I think it doesn't manage to do this because it ends up feeling post-racial in a way that doesn't feel productive, but it is trying to establish this place of don't not talk to a black person to learn not to be racist, but to educate yourself on issues like systemic racism.
That implies, and here's what I will say, that implies that the default mindset for a person that hasn't interacted with black people is racism, and that's just not the case.
I don't think that's necessarily true.
Well, because what you're saying is that, you know, he's his racism stems from things, you know, from the fact that he's very insulated in his community and stuff like that. That implies that humans are that people are by default racist.
No, I think it comes from that community that he was insulated in, feeding him for his entire life racist, not incredibly racist ideologies, but mildly racist ideologies that he is able to overcome. We're talking about this character, this one that is able to finally get to talk to a black guy and learn how his actions are insulting or terrible, because Don Shirley doesn't take his shit as he's known as the bullshitter. He's talking his way around people. He's got his ways to get into other people's minds, but Don Shirley doesn't take any of that and is able to point out his flaws in a way that he's able to realize who he is, the problems he's made, and I think it makes sense for that to be able to be overcome, because he's not out there doing he's not a member of the KKK or anything. This isn't like super deep set racism. It's just a bias that he doesn't realize he has because he's been insulated.
See, that just implies to me that Tony's racism is slightly more excusable than like the people of the Deep South who.
I think that
also. Sorry, go ahead.
I think that his racism is explained in the context of the film as being a function of his uneducation, and
Exactly.
that's what I'm trying to get across. I think that the message of the film, which I do not necessarily think is a bad one, is that it's about learning. I don't think the movie hits that properly because of how the film ends, but I think what it's trying to prompt its viewers to do, or at least, I mean, I also come from a place, I'm literally in a liberal arts college right now where we talk about critical race theory and classism and all of these things on a regular basis. So I am coming into this film with that as something that I think about and talk about and study regularly. But I think that there is a reading of this film in which the relationship between Mahershala Ali and Lip primarily operates on the highest level as being about class, and then the perhaps on the individual level to the small systemic level, the step up to there to fight that systemic racism is through class understanding, is through the unity between these characters to leave the dining room at the end of the film. Then we leave the dining room and the film falls off of a cliff in terms of its political messaging. But I think that the act of that class unity to leave the dining room is an effective and important political message.
Okay, I want to think.
I think. Okay, Timo, go ahead.
Well, Tanner, you can go ahead because as it happened earlier, it left my brain. It will be back when you're done.
I was literally going to say that we can go back and forth about this forever and the messaging and whatever, but I think we've talked about this for a while.
Okay.
And I will give Timo and possibly Tucker the last point since they've probably talked the least in this.
Yeah, I am. Even so, I think that we've all made interesting points about Tony Lip's racism, but to me, at the end of the film, am not entirely convinced that he is reformed, that he is not a racist anymore. We are shown in the beginning that he, towards the plumbers, and acts in a racist way towards them, in a way that is more racist than the rest of his family, because the rest of his family comes over because they have a stereotype about black people wanting to sexually abuse women when they come over, which obviously is completely unfounded and horrible. But Tony Lip goes further than that and wants to get rid of the glasses that they drank from, to erase their presence from his home. And throughout the film, we see him overcome a lot of those issues with Don Shirley, but we never see him overcome those issues with any other black people. He only ever does it in this specific example. And to me, that is not indicative of his racist ideologies being solved. He could still very well think that, oh, well, I like the doctor because he's cool and all, and I know him and all that. But these other black people, well, they're still horrible, and I don't trust them and that stuff. And so I feel had the film realized that, okay, we can then extrapolate this idea that he's overcome his racism to say that, well, he really has. He doesn't think that these that all black people are the same and has the harmful stereotypes about them. Then that would be more convincing to his, finished character art. It works in the specific, but I don't think it's ever shown in the general. And that is, troubling to me also.
I think that's a symptom of, again, I said this earlier, them not having any black side characters. Like, the only side characters we get are other racist white people. So, yeah, that maybe write some other black characters into this movie about race. Just a thought.
All right, Tucker, I want to hear your final thoughts on this whole thing, and then I've got a question to move us on to the next part of this whole review.
Yeah.
I mean, frankly, I don't really think, and the reason I've been quiet is I don't really necessarily think I'm equipped to handle this conversation on the level that Abram and Tanner, you guys are especially. I find this movie to be fascinating because of the questions it brings up about race. I don't find it particularly damning any particular way because when I watch this movie, I read the intention of the filmmakers to tell a sappy and Oscar baity, heartwarming story, and from that angle, I do believe it succeeds. I watch this film not for its political messaging, but for the characters that it writes, which I believe are very well written, and their progression of their relationship is very believable, and the situations they're put into, for the most part, I think are very believable. There is that context elsewhere, but when I look at what this film was set out to achieve and, through the eyes of a team of white guys who were writing it, I do think that they wrote the film that they intended to. And I think a lot of the problems that this film has from people looking in on it is expecting more out of it. Not in an unfair way. I do think it's reasonable to want films to tackle things, especially the Best Picture winners, on that kind of level. But I don't think every film needs to do that. And for what this film set out to do, I think it definitely succeeds at, which is, I think, what we're going to be spending the rest of the film talking about, which is the acting of these two characters, the ways that they interact with the world around them, the set design and the cinematography and the color palette and all that, which I think are genuinely great. And it's interesting to hear all these complaints about this film that I just don't really care to recognize on a super deep level because I don't think they're necessarily important to the concept of this film or what it's actually succeeding at.
Sure.
Okay, well,
Timo.
my question is, how does all of this discussion impact like your thinking about the film? Does it weigh? Does it have an outsized influence into your into your analysis and your like and dislike of it, or like Tucker seems to be saying that it has less of an importance in terms of your overall opinion of the film?
It has none. I mean, frankly, and I think that's what I was trying to get at is I don't really consider a ton of that when I'm looking at this film. I look at the scenes like, oh, yep, there's the not racist cop, and it feels very similar to a 12 Years a Slave, where it's like, oh, hey, there's the not racist white guy, and I'm like, God, guys, it's so obvious, it's so fucking obvious. But again, I think those scenes are relatively few and far between, and when I'm looking at any of the stuff that you guys are extrapolating from the racism or the politics of this film, when I'm watching this film, I'm focused solely on, do these words that these characters are saying make sense from their personalities and the way that they're interacting with each other, which I think is entirely well done. I mean, Tanner and I were sitting there watching the infamous fried chicken scene, and frankly, I think that scene is actually not that bad. I find it entertaining. I find it to be sensible in terms of where those characters' personalities are, and that's what I kind of applied to a lot of this film. The large-scale racial discussion about it, which can be had, is not important to my enjoyment of this film or why I think it works.
I think it is generally important, but if we can, let that part of the conversation stand as it was, I think that there are a lot of moments in this movie that are very well written comedically. Like the timing of that fried chicken scene, as hashtag problematic as it may be, it's a comedically well written scene. The timing of it all, the shot of them having to back up and go pick up the bucket of it or whatever. And I think that comes from the Fairley brothers, by the way, Timo. You said I think you butchered his name at the beginning. It's Peter Fairley. He's a comedy director.
I also think it's Anthony Minghella. I don't think you pronounce that. Hella.
But he did like Dumb and Dumber. He's a comedy guy, and maybe that's why he didn't handle some of these things, these larger political things all too well. But
probably.
For the most part, he's a comedy guy, and I think that Viggo Mortensen is very funny. I think that Mahershala Ali is a great comedic straight man in this. I'm going to find myself quoting, I've done it already. It's a real Tucker and I situation, where Tucker will say something ridiculous, and I'll do the Mahershala Ali line where I go, that's absurd. Just straight face,
so
deadpan. That comes out of the Pittsburgh bit, which is again a very funny bit. It's very well written comedically, and again, I like Mahershala Ali's performance. He won for Best Supporting Actor in this. Mm-hmm. And should I do the awards right now since I said that? May I? Sir,
it's too
may
late.
I please?
Snowball is already snowballing.
This movie won Best Picture, believe it or not. It also won Best Supporting Actor for Mahershala Ali. Best Original Screenplay, again, one of the contributing writers on this is Tony Lip's actual son. It was nominated for performance in a leading role for Viggo Mortensen and achievement in editing. And that's it. That's all she wrote.
So for me, and I said this at the beginning, I don't think the film caves under the weight of the muddiness of its political messaging. And because I view it as muddy instead of problematic, which I think is a big difference. And I think that stuff is great for the provocation of discussion, because what sits on top of that, the house on top of this foundation that maybe is sinking into a sinkhole or something, is I think genuinely really engaging. The dynamic between Viggo Mortensen and Mahershala Ali and the way that they deliver these sequences, I think is so endearing. And it gets back a little bit to why I think this movie really should have solely been about class, perhaps, and it would have been far stronger. But I think that the ways that they teach each other about their different stations in life and meet in the middle is really great. Like for as existing as the fried chicken sequence is,
it exists.
Them throwing the bones out the window and then just throwing the cup and be like, yeah, we do this too, and then that cut to Mahershala being like, It really is great stuff, and I don't just think that it's comedic. I really think that the writing subplot of this film is really, really great.
Yeah,
I think that
100%.
there is a ton of heart here, and the ways that Viggo Mortensen he goes from being basically illiterate to being shit on by Mahershala Ali to writing these just amazing love
Eloquent,
poems.
yeah.
It's so great, and then the two moments that really cinch that, and why I think that this film is smart on a character level, is one when Viggo Mortensen is writing that final letter about Dolores being like a house with happy lights and people in it, and Mahershala being like, "Yeah, you got it." But then also what I think is just a really lovely final shot to the film, which kind of erases a little bit in the moment the bad taste in the mouth left by how we get back to New York. But her hugging Mahershala and saying thank you for helping with the letters, I think is really great. This movie, I think, has a lot of heart and a lot of soul to it that, for me, exists in a dimension that makes everything that Tanner and I went to bat over a little, not easy to forgive, but easy to set in conversation with each other. I think you can hold the problems with the film politically and its success as a character story together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the way that I think about this whole stuff is I think I do have a bit of a fundamentally different perspective. Movies are art, and to me, art is inherently political, no matter how you manage it. And as a result of that, in the way that I view it, the politics of the film spoil the entire thing. Is that the story, while while I groaned at some jokes, I did laugh at some other ones. While I think that the chemistry between Viggo Mortensen and Mahershala Ali is very, very good, and they're very good actors performing against each other, I think that the way that I view it, that the film just kind of lets all of those elements be overshadowed in its, it's either its muddiness or its problematicness of how it deals with the politics, that to me, I can't watch the film and kind of not forgive but forget. I can't forget those elements while they're happening, because I'm like, I'm watching the fried chicken scene and I'm like, come on, we don't we don't have to use such specific racialized examples, and then it gets brought up later and when they're in the South, and I'm like, I feel like the film has a general lack of sensitivity towards the racial elements that just totally makes me not want to think a whole lot about anything else while I'm watching it. I agree. The film has a beautiful color palette. I think the film is incredibly well shot. I think the film, well, maybe not incredibly, but it's well shot. I never went like,
well shot.
Oh, well, that's a cool shot. But I did never think, weird framing. I think the film has good sound design. I don't think there's anything wrong with anything in it. It doesn't call attention to itself, but most of the time you don't want to call attention to itself.
There's nothing wrong with Green Book?
And so at least when I think about the whole film, I can give it, I can give it praise for specific elements, but I cannot give it praise overall.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's fair.
I think where I come from for this movie, and this is sort of what informs every film that I watch and why I appreciate film as an art form, is I watch films for characters and the way those characters are written and their relationships and how it builds. And I think that this film is intended for that, and the way that it produces these characters through the filmmaking succeeds very, very well. And honestly, I was watching this film and found it to be more predictable and a little bit stranger than I did the first time. But I was watching the sequences and remembering, oh yeah, there's a reason I thought this movie was really great when I walked out of it. And I was laughing at so many of the sequences. I think the comedy of this film is really impressive considering the material that it's dealing with. And because of that, and as someone who grew up with comedy and uses comedy even in, a serious discussion like this to sort of bring a little levity to a situation, I think I think you can be very impressed by the way that this film is able to bring light to things that are dark and make that connect you to the characters and their plights even stronger. That's why I think I relate to these characters. I relate to comedic characters in films. And while some people might be like, oh, you should focus on the drama, focus on the real human thing, I think comedy is the most human that you can get. And when I see these characters doing their funny things and the editing really working with that and the filmmaking working alongside that, I'm impressed by what they put here. And I'm when I think back on this film, frankly, I'm only going to remember the funny parts and the ways that it feeds into their relationship and feeds into the filmmaking. And I think this film is very, very strong because of that.
Well, there you go. I feel like we had a very intense, very long discussion about the politics of this film, and we wrapped it up with how that impacted our overall thinking. And so I think we should condense that overall thinking even further into a couple of numbers and average this thing. Do you guys want to say anything else before we rank it?
I wanted to say one thing.
Okay, go ahead.
I think that the film is quite well edited. I think that the editing is effective in the sense that it does not draw attention to itself, except when it deliberately does, but doesn't feel showy. So the example that I really love is it's this really quick cut montage of Mahershala finishing his sets, clapping, cut to the car in the rain and the rain on the car, the sort of sound transition from the applause.
Oh,
into
that's a
the rain.
Wellesian cut. If I do bring my film history into it,
This guy, look at this guy. Look at this guy.
I had to.
I
I'm
think
sorry.
I think it speaks how, on a fundamental level, the film, from a technical level, not a script level or anything, a technical level, I think
Works.
works really well. And I have to say, I do think the film is quite beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It looks great. It looks great.
I think the cinematography and the color palette combined with that production design, which is impeccable, is what really brings this to life. I mean, it is, and as I've been saying, I think the intention of this film is not to be the dark version of history that we usually see portrayed because it was a dark time for a lot of people, but instead show sort of a more nostalgic look, a more comedic and light tone of it. And it works really through that with bright colors. And that green seafoam blue car is just iconic, and it works so well with the backgrounds and the fields behind them and stuff. This film is genuinely, I think, gorgeous color-wise, and also works well with the really fluid cinematography that's like snapping up to people and shifting focus and stuff. I think that's really impressive and works a lot with the tone that the film is trying to set up.
Okay.
I will say this is a very progressive film for 1985. I'm very impressed.
I will say it is fucking insane that this movie won in 2018. Let me just say that.
If you want a race movie to win, a movie about race, just give it to Black Klansman. It's not hard. Give it to Black Panther, if anything. It's not hard.
Yeah,
the
there
Academy.
were better race movies that came out in 2018. Okay, I think we've gone on long enough. We'll probably go on a little bit after we rank it. Let's punch some numbers in and find out where this all stands. Shall we?
Or give it to Roma. Roma deserved it. I'll say that as we do that.
Roma's boring.
Yeah,
I almost don't know. I have put in like 4 different numbers, and they have all been in wildly different places.
I've been changing my number all over the place. I don't know where to land on this.
Okay, I'm just
Pick
gonna put
one
this in.
and stick with it.
Countdown.
3,
Okay.
2, 1.
Abram? Okay.
And there we go. Wow, we're actually pretty darn close, with one exception, and I bet you can guess who it is. The average score is gonna be, let's see what it all averages out to, 5.9, so just under a 6. And the point breakdown goes as follows, starting from the bottom. I'm a little surprised by this one. Abram gave it a 5.0, I gave it a 5.5, Tanner gave it a 5.8, and Tucker gave it a 7.4. So at 5.9 points, that is going to settle it in between Rain Man and Shakespeare in Love at place number 44.
Sure, why not?
Here's what I want to say about my score.
Okay.
I was swinging anywhere between a 5 and a 7.9. And I think the thing for me is I just had to split the difference and go a flat 5 because
That's not how splitting the difference works.
No, I mean splitting the difference between the entire 10-point scale.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Makes sense.
I knew you were getting there. I knew you were getting there.
I had to just cut right down the middle and say 5, and the reason I did that is because even though I don't find the film to be problematic as you guys do, and I'm actually very interested why your scores aren't lower, so I'll be curious for you to respond to that. But for me, there is so much imprecision here that I cannot in good faith say the movie is better than it is.
Sure.
My personal enjoyment of this film is actually a lot higher, and I think that regardless of what you read into political ideology, I think this is actually a really useful film to, perhaps in a classroom setting, spark conversations around race, because I think it is a very engaging and well-made film that provokes a lot of discussion. But that said, I'm talking about this in the context of the Best Picture winners. There's a lot of really well shot and well edited and well written and funny and well acted films that we watch here that don't feel like they have no clarity in their political messaging. And for a film about race in America, you need to have clear political messaging. And I think that it needs to be, personally, really against the institutions and the systems. And I just think that while I can read that into the film from a class perspective, the post-racial stuff undercuts that, and that's just kind of yucky in a way that leaves me saying, 5, I can't think anymore. We're done.
Yeah, Abram, I think that it's mostly just like how I score films. This film is a 5 for me. I really only use the decimal point to like, is this film less or more boring than things around it? That's what I really use the decimal place for. But yeah, you bring up a lot of good points. I think we're unanimous-ish about this. To explain my joke about how this is a progressive film for 1985, I'll refer to something that you said, is that as a Best Picture winner in the year of 2018, when we shouted out, it's for sure one, possibly two or three other films that handle race better than Green Book. That detracts from my score quite a bit, but at the same time, we really shoved it in right at the end. But it is a technically well-made film. If only it had better politics, I could enjoy it for what it is a lot more.
Yeah, I think my thinking is along those lines. I think I'm gonna give it a 5.5. Maybe I'll give it a 5.7. Maybe I'll give it a 5.
Exactly.
Maybe I'll give it a 5.7. I'm like, what am I doing? Just give it a 5.5. And I think that, yeah, the film gets merits technically. There are certainly lots of films below it that are worse technically, and so that's why it's there. Maybe I gave it a score a little bit too high for my thinking. I can't take it back now.
Who's to say?
It's too late. That enter key is evil.
I hit that.
It takes away all agency.
I committed. I think that yeah. There was a comment from our man John Tor a while saying like, oh, I'm so happy you guys can watch very old Best Picture winners. I think he's talking specifically about Tucker, and when we were talking about the It Happened One Night, it's like you can watch him with 1935 glass or 1939 glasses, and watching this film with 2018 glasses reveals that it just. All of the issues that we're talking about, it's the 2018 that puts the nail in the coffin for me on the film.
It was dated when it hit the screens.
It was dated before it hit the screens. Moonlight, an excellent film that is fairly far up on our list. 2 years earlier, handles race excellently. So it can be done. It can be done.
Tucker?
And you can still win Best Picture. Tucker, yes.
The thing that I find most interesting about this film is the way that, and especially in the context of Quest, is how it kind of frames the ways that each of us individually give our Quest ratings. Because frankly, and this is how I do my ratings just for consistency's sake, is I can't divorce myself from those feelings that I had watching the film. My brain works in specific ways, and if that is a large part of that is film history, and that boosts my enjoyment of It Happened One Night, or a lot of my own brain works in comedy and that boosts my enjoyment of Green Book, I do think those are strong elements that impact, obviously, my ratings, but can impact enjoyment of a film, and why I think this film is still very good. It is a crowd pleaser. I certainly think there's very few metrics you can lay this film against and say it's a bad film. And as a Best Picture winner, it's weird, but I would feel a lot weirder giving it a low score, because it is a good movie. It's a great movie in some aspects for me. And when I'm ranking it against other things, and frankly, I rate for personal enjoyment on every list that I make. I'll never go against that. It's higher than a lot of things. I think I have it higher than Godfather and Godfather 2, because I find it to be a lot more entertaining and frankly interesting than those films. And also, this whole conversation you can have around it for race stuff is way more interesting than a lot of the stuff we see on this dumb show. I think this film is fascinating because it won Best Picture, even though it shouldn't have. I like this film a lot, but it doesn't make any sense as a Best Picture winner in the year of our Lord 2018. It's
Yeah.
ridiculous.
The year that it currently is right now, 2018.
Wait, does year of our Lord only apply to the year it's currently in?
Typically.
Maybe? I don't know.
Typically.
Well,
I don't
the year
know.
of our Lord 1947. Me
it was
referring
the-
to 1947.
It was the year of their Lord, because it's
That's
in the
a
past.
great
It's the
point, yeah.
past us. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think it's time for me to roll up my sleeves. This has been a very enlightening, a brain-embiggening discussion. And I
Our
need
brains grew 3 sizes this day.
I
recently.
need to find out what film has the possibility to follow this up. Are you guys
No,
ready to
no movie has the gumption to follow up Green Book. I
the
think you're gonna spin the
cojones?
wheel and it'll just be a fucking zero.
Oh man, you know what? We forgot to do Italian voices this whole review.
Oh my god, we've got to do horrible talent. Well, hey, we're doing
Hey, what's it gonna be at that next movie, huh?
I do actually like how Viggo Mortensen uses like Italian throughout his speaking stuff, and he also is often muttering in Italian, which is
Yeah.
just hilarious. It sounds like fucking gobbledygook to someone not initiated.
No, gabagool.
All right, it's
Spin that
spin
wheel.
wheel time.
Wheel, what's your deal? Give us a movie that makes us squeal. Is it on digital? Is it on real? Wheel, what's your deal?
I want terms of
Oh
endearment.
boy, and almost the oldest film we could have gotten, number 36.
Oh my goodness.
We are ping-ponging around from the current century to the previous one. Tucker, what
truly.
film is this going to be?
Yeah, this is almost as previous as you can get because this was the second ever Best Picture winner from the year of their Lord 1929, directed by Harry Beaumont, starring Charles King, Anita Page, Bessie Love, Betty Arthur. These aren't names I expect you to know. I don't even know them, frankly.
Okay.
We'll be watching. Oh god, this is a low average score on Letterboxd. The Broadway Melody.
Oh.
I feel like we've got another
interesting.
great Ziegfeld on our hand, boys.
We might.
Yeah.
What's the runtime? That's what made the
that's
Great
the kicker,
Big
that's the
Film what
kicker.
it was.
100, an hour 40. So
Okay, no.
2 hours 20. Okay, sounds good.
no,
Wait, no.
an hour 40 does not mean 2 hours 20.
No, he didn't say 140 minutes.
You said 140.
Yep.
I said
an
an hour
hour
40.
40. Well,
I'm sorry.
here we go.
2 hours 20. Oh, duh.
An hour
Yeah.
40. I'm just saying we could watch this. We could watch this twice or the Great Ziegfeld once. So
That's a good point. Should be twice
Well-
as good as Great Ziegfeld.
We've seen some of these, maybe. We don't really know exactly what this one's going to be because I gather none of us have seen it.
No.
We've seen something that could possibly be similar, but those were wartime films. Is this a depression film or not? We will see. We'll figure out if is it escapist fare or is it truly a diamond in the prehistoric rough of Quest for the Best of Best Picture history. Well, I thank you guys very much for joining me on this episode. We're going to talk about the Broadway Melody. Harry Beaumont, show us what you got. I want to see it. And we're going to talk about it next time on the Quest for the Bestest. We'll see you then. Peace.
I have a knock on the door.
Uh-oh.
I don't know what to do in
Fucking
this situation.
Santa Claus.
Could be. Hello?
Look at this guy.
We haven't quite finished yet, actually. We're gonna be done in like 7 minutes, probably. But you can be in here.
I know, but I didn't want to knock and have
Stay
it.
shoosh.
That's
Shoosh, Martin,
Shoosh. Tough to edit.
I love how Martin's hair looks when he
fair.
come in the door. It looked like
I
it's
know, it's
sticking
great.
2
I
feet
love
out
it.
from the front of his
Look
head.
at that! Look at that guy.
It's really funny.
Okay, I've got
Alright.
does.
2 edits to do this episode.
Do a little silence for like 10 seconds so it's very obvious where Timo needs to edit from.
Sure.
There's no names in it.
You're good, Tucker. That was enough silence.